Well, good morning, everyone. I love the songs that we sang this morning. I haven't sung that last one in a while. We Praise Thee, O God. I love that song so much. So thank you, Dylan, for that. And thank you all for being here this morning. This has become my favorite part of the week, my favorite part of the services, to get to come here and sit at the table with Christ and have him lead us in this meal that we're sharing in together. It's a beautiful thing. It's an awesome thing. And if you've never been a part of this before, we're glad that you're here. And if you have questions, please feel free to tap someone on the shoulder and ask them about this. But hopefully this will help prepare our minds as we come to the table. If you have a Bible, turn over to Exodus chapter 17. Exodus 17, and as you make your way there, I want to share with you a story from when I was in about fourth grade. And just about any story from my childhood is embarrassing, so this will be interesting. But when I was in about fourth grade, we were on the way back from a day trip that we took down to Galveston Island. And for whatever reason, on this car ride home, which was about 45 minutes, I was frustrated about something, I was angry about something, complaining about something. I don't know exactly what it was. I can't remember. Maybe I didn't get something that I wanted, but I was in a terrible mood. And I was complaining to both my parents, but especially to my dad. And so we kind of went back and forth a little bit more, like he just let me talk on and on and on. Until finally I pulled out the line that maybe some of you used when you were a kid, the line that I think just about every kid at some point uses, not the I hate you line. I think I did say that once. I pulled out the you don't love me line. You don't love me. Maybe you've said something like that before growing up. But when I said those words, you don't love me, immediately it was silent. Not because my dad didn't know what to say or I had won the argument or he had no idea how to respond to this. I think it was because he just wanted me to sit there with this careless accusation that had flown out of my mouth. And then after a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes or so, we're driving down the road, and my dad was so good at this. He looked over his shoulder to the right, and he said, "Do you see that hospital over there?" And I, in probably some sarcastic tone, said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, that's the hospital where you were born. And if you keep this up, we're going to drop you back off there." He didn't actually say that. That would have been a good line. I'm clicking save on that one. He didn't say that. What he said instead was, when you were born, the doctors weren't sure if you were going to make it. Everything was fine at first. I held you in my arms, and it was beautiful and wonderful and amazing. But after just a couple minutes, you began to turn blue. And the nurse immediately came and took you from my arms and rushed you to NICU. And as those doors shut behind, I didn't know if I would see you again. But every day for the next 3 weeks, after work, I would drive from Houston all the way to this hospital and just sit in this parking lot and pray and beg God over and over again, "Please don't take my baby boy." And every day since March 21st, 1998, when I held you in my arms, I have always loved you. And then there was silence. My dad won. I had no idea what to say in response. Not just because I knew I was completely wrong for my careless complaint and my just foolish accusation, but because I knew how deeply I was loved. And I remember even in that moment, as we drove down that road, fourth grade Jarrett had some tears in his eyes, looking out the window, hoping my dad wouldn't see. But have you ever had a moment similar to that? Maybe you were complaining about something to your parents or to a spouse. Maybe you were even frustrated with them about something. And over again, you're venting to them about these frustrations that you have, and you're complaining against them. And then maybe in that moment, or perhaps it's after a few days or weeks, or maybe it's even years, you look back and you realize just how foolish that complaint really was. That their compassion for you far outweighs your complaint against them. I think as I've moved away from home for, I guess, the now 6+ years or so, I've come to realize that a lot. I've looked back at a lot of the experiences growing up, and all the times that I complained, all the times that I was upset and frustrated with my parents, I've come to see and appreciate that those are far outweighed by their deep love for me. And maybe you have an experience like that. But here's the question I want to ask you this morning. Do you suppose that we ever do that in relation to God? There in Exodus 17, if you turn there, begin reading with me in verse 1. Exodus 17 and verse 1 says this: all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses, and they said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" And so Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" All right, so here's the scene. Israel has just been delivered from slavery in Egypt. They've been led through the Red Sea, and now they've been following this pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, and eventually they come to Rephidim, this last stop before Mount Sinai. And as these 2 million plus people have come here, they start looking around and they realize, hey, there's no water here. There's no natural source. There's no river or lake or well that's dug. And so they start to worry. And it's not like they can send somebody over to Sam's Club and pick up a 2 million pack of Dasani or Fiji or Smart Water or whatever is the preferred drink of your choice. If they don't have a natural source of water, it's over. If they don't find some way to get water to these people, then thousands, if not tens of thousands, and perhaps eventually hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. And perhaps maybe we're supposed to look at this and see that maybe they're being over dramatic. Perhaps that's what we're supposed to see in the text, but it seems like by all indication, this is a very serious matter. That they don't have any water to feed them and their livestock and their children. And so what are they going to do? So they raise this complaint against Moses. They quarrel against Moses, and apparently it gets so intense that verse 4 says the people were ready to stone him over this. Right? Somebody has to be held responsible. So Moses, we're taking you out. But what's interesting to me is that in this story, it's not just Moses who they quarrel against, who they're upset with, who they complain to. It's ultimately God. And it's not just that they're quarreling with God. The word quarreling really doesn't quite do it justice, I guess, in the English language, but in the Hebrew, it's connected with a lawsuit. So later, when you start reading into the law, especially in Deuteronomy, this same word, quarreling, is translated dispute, bringing a charge, bringing an accusation up, charging with someone, a dispute against someone in a formal court of law. And so they are bringing this accusation to God, quarreling against him. And in verse 3, we see this idea connected. Look at verse 3 again. Moses says, "Why do you quarrel with me, and why do you put the Lord to the test?" See, the people aren't just complaining to God, they are bringing a complaint against God. They're raising an accusation against him. They're putting God to the test, or we might say they're putting God on trial, holding him responsible for this. And what's the accusation? What's the accusation here? It's not just about the water. It's partly about the water, right? They need water to drink. They're worried. They're concerned about how they're going to take care of them and their children. But it's more than that. Look at verse 7 again. Verse 7, they call the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling, the testing, the dispute of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Is the Lord among us or not? That's their accusation. That's the charge that they're raising against God. I know you led us out of Egypt. I know you parted the Red Sea. I know that you've led us by that pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. But what about now? What about here in the desert? What about when there's no water to drink and all hope seems lost and I'm worried and concerned for my family? What about when the situation seems hopeless and that we've been led all this way for nothing? Is the Lord among us or not? Or, in the words of fourth grade Jarrett, their complaint is this: "You don't love us." That's their accusation. You don't love us. You're not really with us. You're not really for us. You're not really taking care of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this desperate situation. Is the Lord among us or not? And so how does God respond to this? Well, notice God, he doesn't get angry. Now, at some point, their complaining and their murmuring and their grumbling will reach a point to which God's patience and faithful love will finally allow them to bear the consequences for their grumbling and complaining. That will come, but it'll come much, much later. But here in this moment, God is patient with them. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't get upset. He doesn't fly off the handle in wrath and vengeance or point out how foolish their accusation is. Instead, it seems like God actually accepts their call to the stand. It seems like God actually accepts their accusation. And here's what I mean by that. Look back at verse 5 again and notice what God is doing here. Verse 5, the Lord said to Moses, here's his answer: "Pass on before the people and take with you some of the elders." Now, why would he be taking the elders with him? Well, you see this also in the law. The elders, they have a large part in resolving the different disputes within the tribes of Israel. And here they're especially called upon to witness as to what is about to happen so that they can go back and report this to the people. And so the elders, we might think of them as kind of tribal judges. They're coming to witness what God is about to do. And he says, along with that, take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. Now, what is it about this staff? What does this staff symbolize? Well, he connects it with the staff that struck the Nile and that initiated the 10 plagues and that parted the Red Sea. The staff often represents judgment. Judgment in the sense of sort of the wrath of God against the enemies of Israel, like in the 10 plagues, but also judgment in the sense of rule. The one who holds the staff is the one who has the right to rule. And so he takes this staff of judgment, and then God says this is the most interesting part to me. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. Now think about this. Who typically does the standing, right? In a law court, in a court of law, who typically does the standing? It's the defendant, right? The defendant always stands before the judge, the person who's been charged, the person who has been accused. And here, that figure is God. He's going to stand upon the rock, probably in the form of that glory cloud, that pillar of cloud. He's going to stand upon the rock. And as God takes his stand on the rock before all the elders of Israel, Moses then strikes the rock with that staff of judgment. And what flows out from that rock is life-giving water for all the people. And maybe you're starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But think about it. God could have provided water any other way, right? He could have sent rain. He could have had a mist come up from the ground. He could have had a well magically appear, like in the story of Hagar. But he chooses this. And why is that? What is God trying to communicate to us and to Israel in this action? And I think what he's doing is he's answering their question. Right? Is the Lord among us or not? Here they are, they're upset, they're angry, they're frustrated. This is their accusation. You don't love us. Is the Lord with us or not? And God answers by providing for them. He says, I'm right here. I'm providing for your every need. I'm taking care of your every need. But more than that, what he's saying specifically in this striking of the rock, as God places himself on that rock which was struck, he's saying, I will take the strike of judgment on myself so that my life can flow out to you. Can you see Jesus in that story this morning? Sometimes with different connections that we make in the Old Testament, I'm sometimes hesitant or skeptical. I'm like, I don't know, am I supposed to see that or not? I think in most cases we are. But it's always helpful when the New Testament writers reflect back on a moment and confirm exactly that thought. And maybe some of you are thinking of this very passage. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 1 says this. He says, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them. And that rock was Christ. Do you hear what Paul is saying here? He looks back at Exodus 17 and he connects it to Jesus. And why does he do that? Because just like in Exodus 17, Jesus stood trial undeservedly. There's no real charge or accusation for which he is arrested. He's brought in on an unfair trial, but the elders of Israel, they conspired together to render this judgment against him. And Jesus accepts it. He willingly embraced the rod of judgment by his death on the cross. And just as water flowed from the rock in Exodus 17, when the soldier struck Jesus' side with that spear, John 19 tells us what flowed out from the body of Jesus was blood and water. Jesus is the rock that was struck. And we have a song about this. Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy wounded side which flowed be of sin the double cure, save from wrath and make me pure. So maybe this past week you found yourself in a place much like Israel in Exodus 17. I think we all ask the same question, or perhaps even make the same accusation from time to time. Is the Lord among us or not? Because that's what we want to know. When we find ourselves in our own desert of distress and we feel like we're thirsting for that last drop of water, wondering if we're going to make it through, we have that same thought. Is the Lord among us or not? Is he really there? Does he really care? Does he really love us? Is the Lord among us or not? And do you know what Jesus' answer is to our question and to our accusation? Every time we eat this spiritual food and drink this spiritual drink, Jesus proves his love toward us, gladly saying over and over again, I will take the strike of judgment on myself so that my life can flow out to you. And so as we come to the table this morning, I want to close by reading once again those words from 1 Corinthians 10, but I want to paraphrase just a couple phrases to tailor it to us this morning before we partake. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters here at Lost River, that our spiritual ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea of baptism into Christ. And all ate this same spiritual food, and all drank this same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them all their lives, and that rock was Christ. We'll now ask the men to come forward as we partake this morning.